So welcome to provide services to people with coexisting mental health and alcohol and other drug issues. This is session 3 of CHCMHS005. So in the spirit of reconciliation, Hayter Institute of Education acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first inhabitants of this nation and the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live and study. We express our gratitude for the sharing of this land, our sorrow for the personal, spiritual and cultural costs of that sharing, and hope that we may move forward together in harmony in the spirit of healing. We pay our respects to all First Nations people and acknowledge elders past, present and emerging. Just a bit of housekeeping before we go on. Just remind everybody that, certain information can have a trigger warning, or it's more, it could be an emotional reaction or just discomfort. At the end of the session, we'll have a list of resources, but I think mostly to think about putting yourselves into the position as the worker and how you regulate yourself through different ways of working with many different clients. And this time of year, please, I know we keep talking about it, but the stress, the importance on making sure that you're looking after yourselves and getting some sort of refreshed brain around resting it and then revitalizing, fresh air, doing some activities for yourself away from everything else that you have in life to do. So just remember to look after yourselves. There's a lot of illness around at the moment, so please take that time to do that. So this is session 3, as I said. Welcome, Bonnie. So overview of session 3, we've got building a working relationship. We're looking at documenting plans. So this is around your case notes and wellness plan templates that you have, especially with AOD, because AOD has quite a few requirements around planning because it is a coexisting need more than anything, and so can be quite complex and heavy with paperwork. We're looking at facilitation strategies on how you work with the participant and make that collaboration and therapeutic relationship, and doing referrals, all part of the processes here, all part of procedures that have policies in place in every organisation. And each organisation might do this differently as well, but across the board, there are some AOD assessments that are within the industry that many organisations use. So I'm going to do a bit of a warm-up activity first. So we're going to go into our breakout rooms, and I'll give you the instructions shortly. Just going to press pause here, recording. Okay, so let's kick off tonight with talking about building a working relationship. Now, I know we've gone over many a times around the boundaries around relationships and protocols and procedures, but how do you put into place a working relationship that's has effective communication and covers all the areas around, empathy, building respect, but whilst we're still trying to gain information, so it's a fact-finding time as well as we're trying to bring that therapeutic support in, but then gather strength, help build those strengths, autonomy as we go. So it's quite a multifaceted time where often sometimes the participant might be confused around the connection with a worker because they're working very hard to try and find out the information and how best to support the participant. But that care often gets seen as more closeness. This is where we have to make sure we're talking about our boundaries as well. But excuse me, it's a constant time for change. And I think the one of the better ways that I've found to start off with in working with participants in any field is explaining the benefits of their own well-being to them, what that's going to look like when it's in place. It could be around the part where you talk about if you could picture yourself in 6 months' time when you've been doing some work, what will that look like? Because that's going to be our working journey together. So you see, I'm putting out the platform here for boundaries for a start, but we've got a bit of a road to go. So we've got work to do. But at that point, when somebody's first come to see you, there's the anxieties, the unsureness. Don't know if I blend or click with you. I'm not sure if the service is going to be the right one for me. I don't know why I'm here. All those confusion questions can happen. How is this going to work? Don't think you can help me. So there's a lot of negativity for some people because there's fear. If I open up and let you in, that's a bit of work that I've got to do. I'm not sure about that. So think about that and not put the emphasis on so much about what you're going to be doing, but about the product, that the end, that well-being, what that's going to be for the client. What's that? How will that help them have a pathway forward? How is that going to foster their strengths? And this is us showing them how we're going to support them in their journey. We're respecting that process here. And this is where we build that rapport. This is about we communicate effectively. So think about it's not a rushing time. It's getting to know, it's a fact-finding time, but we can't rush at the participant. Fear of overwhelming. We're just gathering information, reviewing. As we get more information off the participant, we'll change approaches and things, but this is all goes on in the background. At the forefront is those communication skills to build that working relationship. How is that going to progress? What do we do? And if you can talk about in that process, describe what the benefits and the limitations, like I said, around your boundaries, around the benefits of well-being. You also can just touch lightly on some sort of approaches that you'll use. So you could talk around the strengths-based approach and what is that? What does that mean for the participant? This is about how explaining to the participant how you're going to give them information, knowledge, resources, and along the way, it'll build up a bank of knowledge and support for them to have their own autonomy and leadership in their recovery and well-being. So sometimes it might take a couple of goes to even explain fully what will that mean for the participant and what that looks like. Now, I just wanted to bring in a, better put in it's a toolbox tip from me. So this is around a therapeutic relationship. So this is what it would look like for an AOD specialist, GP, psychotherapist. And I want you to understand where they're coming from and what they're looking for, because similar techniques to being a support worker or a peer worker or a case manager in the same field. And we're looking at taking on the strengths-based approach. We're looking at the person. And we've talked about trauma-informed care before. How do you do that? That's stepping in gently, full awareness that previous experiences can cause trauma, and we work slowly with that. We don't rush. And this, as a best practice process, is around helping behavior change. So the first things to point out here is that when you're working with somebody in the AOD industry, that their identity is much more than the AOD use. And that statement is right behind motivational interviewing. Because a respectful, non-judgmental approach, which understanding trauma fosters, that helps build a rapport and helps take away the stigma. And often, overall, therapists have found that that approach can help the retaining of information for the participant. So when they're building that therapeutic workplace and using the strength-based approach, it has an it has an open door, and that shows that person that across their life cycle, they can cycle in and out of this, which we do know around there's the stages of pre-contemplation, contemplation, those theories, but it is an actual revolving door around therapy as well. And it can grow across a person's life cycle because it's often something that needs to be maintained forevermore to keep that person in an optimal place that they feel supported and they're always working towards it. So this understanding of why we're working from a strengths-based approach, why we're doing motivational interviewing to bring about the change for someone, goes right across the board. Sarah?
How do you help people see what they want to be like? Or what they want their life to look like, because they might feel so stuck and can't see that there's ever going to be a way out, so they can't know what they want their life to look like.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel a bit like that because I just think I cannot change who he is, so I'm always going to live like I am because I can't escape it. So how do you help someone identify what they want their life to look like?
To help someone identify a way forward is to identify exactly what we're talking about here, strengths-based. What strengths do you and what things do you put in place to keep functioning well? What does that participant do well that they're not giving recognition to? And finding out if I always believe if somebody's still here, they're doing something to maintain either that status, whether it's good or not, they're doing something to maintain that status, especially when I've worked with people with homelessness. If they've been on the street, physically on the street, and they've been doing that for a long time, there's an awful lot of resilience and skills there to know how to still be here. For people who have been through trauma, they're still here. So there's a point where looking at those strengths that are not recognized because there's too much of the negative feel of what's going on.
Yeah.
So I would slowly be working to foster rapport, but bringing in, taking the stigma and the shame away from, I feel trapped. I feel caught up in the processes of what I'm doing, and I don't feel like I'm moving anywhere. But if we start to unpack what that person does daily, weekly, are they still holding a job? Are they managing their finances? All these things. What sort of relationships do they have? Do they take care of a pet? This is one thing that gets a lot of people. If you start to talk about, and a lot of people who live on the street have a pet. And it was interesting when we pulled up on that, excuse me, trauma-informed practice of identifying things that keep people safe. Often people have pets that keep them safe because it's a function of feed, a little bit of interaction. They mightn't walk the pet, but they might sit and pat the pet. They might clean up after the pet. They mightn't eat themselves that day, but they'll make sure they feed that pet. Bonnie?
I was just going to just say that Uniting, I think it's in most states, they actually have a vet come in once a week or once a fortnight for the homeless to bring their pets in. They also give out dog food and dog biscuits.
Oh,
Okay.
that's lovely.
Mm.
That's really nice.
Yeah.
Because it's therapeutic.
Yeah.
It's
And it gives them
therapeutic.
Conditional love.
a purpose. A
Yes.
purpose.
If that's their only safe place
Mm.
for some people, no matter what situation they're in, that pet will be their safe place. So often people relate it to art, that art is their safe place when they make art or mold something, things like that, but they don't see it as a strength.
Mm.
So I would be flipping this motivational interviewing, because it is a challenge to bring somebody away from that thinking that I'm stuck, to taking one or two steps forward. And it only takes one or two, and then one or two more, but this is over a period of time. It doesn't happen overnight. So our job, gently encourage, find positives, and this is where transformation can take place without you even knowing it. Because we're looking for behavior change. So if you did a review in 6 weeks, what has one thing that somebody's changed? Bonnie?
I also find that with AOD and homelessness, just the fact that somebody showed up for support and is gaining knowledge, even if they regress, that knowledge sticks with them, and
Yeah.
the resources stick with them. So
Yes.
all those things that they've gained from that session, even though it can be frustrating if they leave those sessions and go away for a while and then come back, they're still learning something each time, which brings them back.
Yes. Yes. And it becomes something of this will be their pattern. And often they'll come back 6 months later and go, do you remember me? Sure I do. I'll think of your name in a minute, but I remember when you brought yourself in and that dog. Oh, you remember my dog? Oh, here's the dog, Yep. But they knew just exactly what Bonnie said. They knew where to come back. So it's only because they're not quite ready to do something or that doesn't fit where they're at, but it goes up in here, it stays.
Mhm.
And when I need support, I'll reach out. It's hard to break cycles. This is what we've got to remember. It's hard to break cycles. And because we're talking AOD here, that cycle is cyclic. It can go around and around. You enter and exit at different points in your life cycle. So gentle steps, motivational, finding the resilience in someone. And when you note this down and you give credit towards it, that goes in their bank because they can pull on that later on. They mightn't show you that goes into their bank, but nobody's pointed it out before to them. Could be hard to believe right now. Write it down. Because there's nothing like going back over and reading those words. That's what somebody said about me. These are tools we have that cost nothing. As workers, it's about how we communicate, how we sit with that person, and how we can identify strengths. Can I ask what would be one thing that you could look for to identify for somebody that they have a strength in? Pick anything.
Resourcefulness.
In what way, Bonnie?
Resourcefulness as in being able to find support when they need it.
Yes, love that. Yeah. Yes. How did you come back to this service? How did you find where to get dog food for your dog, so to speak? How did you do that? That's a resource. That's amazing. So if they were able to get food or find
Or if
shelter.
somebody's, find shelter or find, I don't know, in Perth there's not many places, but finding a place where you can have a shower, being able to camp somewhere where there's a public toilet. Yeah.
How you've accessed the Orange Sky van.
Yes.
You know, all
What's
these
that?
things. They've gone to Rosie's food van that comes around once a week. These are all resources, acknowledging resources. Good point, Bonnie.
Yeah. Well, the orange, sorry, Sarah just asked about the Orange Sky van. That provides a shower. They do your laundry and dry it and fold it.
Oh,
Don't know what
okay.
else, if they provide something else, but they go to different spots all around the place.
Yeah. So
Same
often,
as a street doctor. Yeah.
often the
And
van has a washing machine dryer service,
yeah.
but also they have mobile shower units and they pop them up like the camping shower type thing, but they have hot water. They tap onto it. They do tea, coffee, light refreshments, but they also have internet available. They can help you do your Centrelink work if you need to do that, and they give you resource information all whilst you're getting there. So there's amazing resources out there doing amazing work, but we never hear enough about it. But resources are one of the biggest ways that we can talk about overall well-being that somebody's doing.
Yeah, and I find it's quite hard for a homeless person or some homeless people to reach out and actually ask for help and ask where can they get support, because there's that shame involved. And if they have that's courage, that's another strength. Just to
Yes.
reach out and say, look, I'm needing some help. Where can I get it?
So this is why it's always really good too, as part of your practice. That's a good point, Bonnie. I just thank you for reminding me that when somebody comes in to work with you, You can thank them for finding their way there. And it's just to make a little bit of talk of, how did you find your way here? Was it easy? Did you use transport or bring yourself? That's good. How did you find out about the service? So what you're doing here is finding out, how did that person find something to support themselves with? So did they hear it on the street? Did they see a sign? But the thing is, next is to then give recognition. So I thank you for finding that strength to come and step in through the door and seek support. That talks about your resilience and strength here. And they'll probably like, no.
Yeah.
Well, the first step is that you've asked for support. You've found the resource to come to. So there's two things you've actually actioned. We often don't think about stepping into a resource. We've made an appointment and we turn up for many different things. That's a very hard thing to do, to walk through the door. You haven't made a pre-appointment and the service already carries shame and stigma for a lot of society. So acknowledge that. Put that in your toolbox. You acknowledge that they found the service and came in and sought support. This is all about building that trusting relationship. We're trying to help somebody see that they'll be safe here. You can trust this service. We're here for you. We mightn't have all the resources, but together we can find referrals and we'll do that step by step. Think about those processes around, we've talked about it before. I hear you. So when you say I hear you, I see you.
Yeah.
So when you're thinking about I see you, that means you've stepped in to ask for support. These are all important skills that we bring to the table to motivate change. It's a huge cycle. When you start to unpack the things we do in this cycle, just in the first session together, the first meeting. Because if we can use an open communication, if we can show what the service is about, what your work style is about, how you can support somebody, but also thanking them for stepping into that space, is a good way to look at the whole person and move forward with them. Once again, you're not looking at the AOD problem here, you're looking at the person. So in doing that motivational interviewing when working with somebody is crucial. That is a pivotal point, because motivational interviewing creates a space of change, of thinking about well-being, of possibilities from negative to, I can flip that and make it appear. So now I've got two choices to think of. I'm not just thinking of the downside. If it's flipped for me and you identify, well, if you looked at it this way, there's two choices. Before they only had one. So you're opening up their train of thought. These are all based on counselling principles with motivational interviewing. So good active listening. Remember, we don't always need to fill the space with words. We could say a few things and wait. show that you're listening. You're absorbing the message. And you can explain that to them. I'm understanding rather than just hearing. I'm understanding and hearing. And for you as the worker, understanding that you bring your verbals and your non-verbals in together. And then the techniques start to be implemented around normalizing statements. You speak up and talk about issues, feelings that may be difficult to express due to guilt, shame, fear, embarrassment. And when you give recognition to somebody who's feeling these things and that they're not the only one experiencing and feeling those same things, often is a little break point opening, a little crack through to think I'm not on my own here. Because in those feelings, when they are on their own, they do feel all alone. They do feel like they're the only ones experiencing that. And there was a saying that I heard, if we're all alone, we're alone in this together. And it changes something because a lot of people can feel loneliness and isolation. Welcome, Bron.
Hi.
So in feeling isolated, the only one that's going through this emotion and changes can also, that's another normalizing statement. If we're all alone in this together. And often for somebody, they have difficulty expressing that. So when you can normalize something in any motivational way to change that experience, you're reframing a position, an action, a thought, a feeling, to look at an issue in a different way that you can help the participant move forward, is that you're creating a positive approach rather than focusing on the negative of the situation. That goes back to what you were asking about before, Sarah. So reframing something and that person feels stuck somewhere, reframing things also is another tool that you could use to support a participant. And when we summarize where that person is up to, in a combination with, we do reflective listening. So remember how we're doing that and presenting back to the participant what we've heard. Often this is where we can start to look at, so when I'm going to reflect what you said here and you say it. In saying that, how would that look if we did it this way? If we flipped it and thought about it this way? Here you're starting to open up those channels to think differently. We use open-ended questions because we want people to open up and talk. And questions that rely on one or two answers will get that monochromic no, yes, maybe. They don't help the participant to think deeper. There are some questions that we do need to ask that might have a yes or a no. And that's more about information about them, around basic information and details and things like that. But when we're asking questions, even when we think about it, have you ever felt blah, blah, blah? You've got to remember that'll be a yes or a no. So if you're going to say that, talk about, can you tell me about a time if you felt this way? Think about those wordings because it catches you. You know, have you ever been through this? Blah, blah? No. I didn't open up enough. So then I would have to flip it. So let me pose it this way. If you were to blah, 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 what would that look like? Can't put a yes or a no there. So we're trying to tease more out. We're wanting the participant to think more in depth. So closed questioning is for those short things that we need a yes or a no for. So, but when we're paraphrasing, when we're summarizing up, we summarize with a bit more details than what the participant has spoken about. We're not repeating word for word here. We're summarizing up, but this is where we can add a little bit more to it. This is where we can practice those skills on, I'll take you back to when you said blah, blah, blah. That's when you can say, well, then what would that look like if you did it this way? Or can you tell me a bit more about the blah, 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 blah? Because when you spoke about this, I heard you talking about things that actually describe strengths to me. So tell me a bit more about that. And this is also where you're doing that reflecting back. You're looking for that underlying message of what that participant is saying. And are they actually at that time showing any feelings? Because if they're identifying or showing feelings, there's another point for you to take note from. Because that's something you can then teach the participant about that they might not have realized about. So when you were talking about your family or your past trauma, I noticed that your physical reactions were this. It must mean something to you. Can you tell me a bit more about that? They often will say, I didn't realize I reacted that way when I did that. So you might see somebody start to get the shakes or the nerves because they're talking about something that's quite unrattling for themselves, basically. Or there might be somebody that you see them soften when they talk about, or they might struggle and pull back and frown and really struggle to find the words. There's a conversation. I noticed you had a reaction when we were talking about, and was that difficult for you or was it challenging? Can you tell me a bit about that? Because often that'll bring out a little bit more for you. And often when using that technique, it's like attending, and they call it attending skills here, but you're attending to the person. You are present with the person. You're ensuring that the participant can see the worker is interested in them and whatever problems that they're working through. And your use of body language, how you're responding, your non-verbal face, your cues, your have to be aware of what you're doing, because you can discourage somebody very quickly by not paying attention. Or in some ways, it can actually create a defensiveness. Well, you're not even listening properly to me. You didn't even hear me enough. I noticed you were looking away and fiddling. So somebody's going to be watching you. Some people are very focused on that because they're looking to see if your interest is there, because I'm not going to trust you until you show me that you're interested in me. And I'm not going to give you too much because how do I know what you're like? How can I trust you? So all these little nuances are there. And people can often be discouraged because they feel like you're not present for them, not present in the process, not present for them. So that's problematic. So all these skills we are doing in one session. It is a lot of work. It is a lot of processes here. And often it comes down to the person you are. Do you work with empathy? What is your framework here? Are you somebody that works with empathy, openness, and inclusiveness? Are you culturally aware? All these things build up a framework of understanding. If before you walk into working with somebody, if you have this as your framework, you will do all of these things naturally. Often when we first start working, we have to practice at these. We really do have to practice how to do these. We don't know how they all work. So it is a practice when we first start out. This is also a practice when we might be confident in what we do, but then we have challenging people that we work with. So we've got to go back through those cycles of what you're doing and revisit sometimes. But all of these things we have in place as our skills. It's a big list. So we're going to have a look now at the model of change, what they call the trans-theoretical model. Now, so trans-theoretical is a process where there's steps in each recovery stage that people can cycle in and out of. And I know we've talked about it before, but often this trans-theoretical change model can be used in different casework, peer work, in all different sectors, because people will come in often and go through different cycles of change before they can get to where they want to be. And they might come in and out to that. In homelessness, domestic and family violence, relationship breakdowns, AOD use, grief and loss, many different sectors of support, of trans-theoretical support, psychotherapies, are all about how we contemplate how we're going to come in and do the work. And we might have a lapse or a relapse. There might be something that another life-changing event that pulls you from what you're doing and it takes you off track again. So I like to use this model for all different types of work that you're doing because it helps you stay present with the participant to what's going on in their life, because everybody has life events that can take them off track, and then when they come back to it. Same with eating disorders, health and fitness, weight loss, all these things. You'll look at these stages, and then we're going to have a quick discussion after the video. It's only a short one, but I want you to see how you can put all different sectors towards it. I'm just going to press pause here. So we're looking at the trans-theoretical model for those at home. So as you can see, they did introduce that as, in this instance, it is relating to the AOD sector. But can you look at this through a different lens and relate it to another area that you might work in the mental health field, in the community sector, how could you put that towards a different sector of work? Ron?
I've had a client that asked for, is it Ozempic the other day? And the GP has said, I'm not giving it to you. You need to try the other way first and work on, getting out healthy, fitness, speak to a dietitian and stuff like that. So that is exactly sort of what I came up with a bit of a plan on, let's ease into it just slowly, small things. And we know cutting back, your eating and stuff like that, it's going to hurt for a couple of days until your body and your mind get used to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so contemplating whether I'll step into it or not.
Yeah.
And then step in slowly, and then get to a point where it becomes a habit,
Yeah.
and then celebrate, but then you might have a slip up.
And look,
That's
I know
only-
myself with my own running goals and stuff like that. Life gets in the way, work,
Yeah.
study, family.
And the thing is to help the
Yeah.
participant pass that.
Yeah.
It's only if you show them the cycle that they're on, this circle,
Yeah.
and they just hit a road bump and they just went outside, you're going to pick yourself up and go back on the running track. In your case, just
I
work
actually
that out.
looked it up because I think we have used it before and I couldn't think of the name. So I Googled about 10 different things and found it and sent it to them and said, just look at the cycle here. And when you, and I said, and I can print it off or you can, and cross out each one as you get to each stage, maybe.
Yep.
So that's what
And
they've done.
it's okay to come off track
Yeah.
and come back in because life happens.
Yeah.
Also remind that, because
Okay.
a lot of people beat themselves up because they haven't been able to make that circle stay a circle.
Yeah.
Because
And it's
the
the same
concept,
with, and when they weigh themselves, I said, look, I've been there, done that. We've all done it. But, some days it's hard to sort of imagine why you're up 2.5 kilos, but then you're down the following. So it's trying to say, don't worry about the scales. Let's just work on starting off with a small thing and just gradually working at it.
and often here there's other tools. If you're talking weight loss, it is about, what do your clothes feel like on you today?
Yeah.
Or we used your belt that you wear all the time. Have you changed a notch? It's changed. Were you able to do more than you did yesterday?
Yeah.
And even though you might be 2 kilos up, that could be fluid, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is that, did you perform? So you're finding those positives.
Yeah.
And tomorrow, we're back on our cycle. Definitely. Anybody else think that they could relate this to any other sort of work that you could do in the industry?
Eating disorders, so going the other way.
Yep. Domestic and family violence. Stuck in that pre-contemplation. I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know what to do. To contemplating, stepping up and asking a service to support them. Eventually making an exit plan. And over time, managing to get to a service for support whilst they're contemplating that plan. And getting resourceful and getting things into place to then actioning something and then moving through the next steps. Those first 3 steps are very similar in many different fields. And this is where we acknowledge the participants stepping up and asking for support, and that you're ready to do some changes. Even though you're scared, you're nervous, you're not sure if it's going to work or not. The thing is that you've stepped up. And this is where we can also talk about as stages of change of what you will go through whilst you are working towards your wellness. So you can bring this cycle in and relate it to wellness and moving forward, your overall well-being, sorry, wrong word. And there mightn't be a very obvious present form of wanting to change, but there's some sort of willingness to. And often when they're not willing to change, a behavior is, pardon me, addictive, and it's easier to stay that way than the recovery work. And people become defensive, and they can be dismissive and don't want to talk about it because it seems all too hard. But when we get to the contemplating stage, when we contemplate something, means that we're on that cusp of seesawing. I'm undecided, but I can see that there's still problems I need to address to even get there. They might lack confidence. They might lack information. They're getting closer. But when they prepare, when they take small steps to step into it, they are starting to see that changes are needed in them. And this is where they start to take responsibility for change. This is where the planning can start, because they've identified something in them might be about what I do not want to keep doing. Mightn't be more about what I do want, but it could be more about I know what I don't want to keep doing. So there's a starting point. This is where you start to take action. This is where you're starting to help them change that behavior. This is where all the different stages start to really change. And this is where a lot of things can happen in between lapse, the maintenance, relapse, and getting back onto the cycle. So we've gotten past the first hurdles of being very negative about it, to getting to thinking about it, to taking a first step and knowing that something's got to change, but we're not quite sure, and then finding skills that help them to move forward. But how do you maintain that? How do you avoid returning to old behaviors? And this is where the coping and self-management strategies are of great help. If you're a case manager, a support worker, as well as their work with their therapists, because a relapse can happen and it's not about failing. It can be quite normal to have a lapse and a relapse. Now, a lapse and a relapse are a little bit different, but it's about a learning opportunity, and it's about identifying what triggers that slip some people up and relapse back into usage, whether it's a one-off or it's a full hard-on change, because that cycle, that part of what's happened for somebody, there's been a crisis point in their life. Something's happened, something's changed. Bron?
Is there more relapsing in drugs or alcohol, or it just depends on in general?
Sorry, say that again.
Is it more common to have, say, relapses in alcohol versus drugs, or about the same?
That's an interesting one. I wouldn't know the difference, what was more, if it was alcohol or
yeah.
if it was drugs.
Or in your experience?
Yeah, I'm not sure about the difference of level, but
yeah,
the same cycle's happening.
yeah, okay.
Bonnie?
So would it be, so if somebody's gone through the whole cycle and had a certain length of sobriety, whether it be drugs or alcohol, then that's an experience that they might want that we can use that they might want to get back to. So if they've experienced that, that would perhaps be a motivator to get back to where they were.
Yes, yes, yes. And this is where the worker can tap into that strength. Remember, you were managing this, you were doing well, but you had a life bump, you had a road bump, because we're trying to learn about the opportunity, the trigger that might have set something off. And this is another set of work to find out what was a trigger that made somebody lapse. And just remember, like we said, this could be in all different ways: a lapse in gambling, a lapse in relationship bad behaviors, a lapse in working towards not being homeless, a lapse in taking one drink, a lapse in taking that extra food. All these things, there's something that often sets off somebody most of the time, but there'll be a gap of why they went to that. They've either gone just straight back to old behaviors. So then that means that work needs to be done on those strategies to stay firmer and stronger. But a lapse can happen. People get bad news. People have a bad day. People have arguments with relationships. People are stressed managing children, families, jobs, money, financialness. It's so many things that happened, that grief and loss, all these things can cause big relapse compared to lapse. We're going to talk about that after we have a break. So I'm just going to stop share. All righty. So let's talk about the models of change in this toolbox alert. Let me just see where I've got. Yep. Yep, up to here. So I wanted to share with you around therapistaid.com's a worksheet on triggers, because we were talking about how triggers can cause somebody to go into a lapse or a relapse here. And I just want to bring up, just find it where I'm up to. Yep. So when we're talking about this stage here, relapse and lapse, this is about where we've gone into the maintenance area, where we're trying to avoid returning to old behaviors and having our coping mechanisms in place and strategies. And we're the ones who are going to teach the participant those strategies. But in the lapse and relapse area, where we support the participant to understand they haven't failed, and it's normal to go through a relapse or what we call a lapse. So a relapse happens when somebody stops maintaining their goal and avoiding the use of alcohol and other drugs in this case, and they might turn to previous levels of use. Now, a relapse, when somebody hasn't had anything for a while and they go straight back into the level that they were using before, this is where they can do an overdose because they have not had that in their system, but they've gone straight back to that high impact, and it can really set things into very damaging. So a relapse where it is a process that takes time to break that dependence, and it's also actually a major feature of recovery. So, and when somebody stops maintaining their goal, it's what they class as a relapse, but it can also be around those triggers and then what's happened. So, because there is a bit of a difference between lapse and relapse. So, oh, excuse me. A lapse is a temporary exit from somebody's alcohol and other drug goals, followed by a return to those goals. So it is often when they set a goal, just say for not using alcohol, but they might have a glass of wine at a party, but then they turn back the next day to their alcohol goal of not having any. So, but it also can depend on if they've used drugs and what substance they've used, because what makes a lapse different from a relapse is that it's a brief period of substance use followed by a clear return to recovery goals. So this would be similar to breaking out and having a cigarette and then going back. My next day, I'm not doing this. I'm going back to be on my recovery goal of not using. But for a relapse, that's when many things can turn somebody into a relapse. And there's a strong connection between dependent alcohol or other drug use and personal challenges. And that could be around trauma, could be around grief and loss, relationship breakdown, many, many different things, because problems can work at somebody's emotional and psychological issues, and that builds up, and it's going back to dependent behaviors. So the process of recovery has been interjected. So often a relapse can be very personal, and it isn't a sign that the person is weak or a failure. It's a continuation of old coping patterns that haven't been replaced by new ones yet. So even though they might have been in that maintenance stage, they're still learning new strategies. But when something really has triggered somebody and hurt somebody, going back to old behaviors is easier to do than to putting new things into place that you're still learning about. And some of those situations that can be pause triggers, setbacks, social stigma, pressures, emotional issues, mental health, pre-existing mental health, and trying to stop usage is quite complex in itself. If somebody has health issues, physical health issues, pain is often a trigger to go into a relapse. And often if we're people who are trying to abstain from using, experience an internal conflict and they end up lapsing, but then that guilt and self-blame can turn that person into using the substance as a coping mechanism. And it might take several attempts to get that right management strategies into place and maintain that to help them back on their goal. So preventing a relapse long-term is about long-term solutions. And this is where activities, strategies help reduce the risks of relapse on the road to recovery. Strategies that are followable and doable by the participant are really important, things that they will engage in. Some people need to steer clear of people they used to socialise with. So there could be settings that cause triggers. So going down to the pub because everybody else is going down there to socialise often is a situation that can lead somebody to usage. So avoiding certain things like that, helping our participants to see that, calling up for clinical and non-clinical support. Those phone lines are great. Formal and informal settings. Formal being network support, informal, family and friends. Often helping our participants to understand that doing meaningful things, doing things that build a sense of positive around them, doing activities that encourage them to be a part of something, a part of doing, creating, being part of a community, sporting group, socializing group, coffee club, book club, gardening club, interacting, cooking with family and friends. Doing something meaningful is around building pride and self-image here. And self-care, balanced lifestyle. This is about helping somebody do that holistic work. A good sleep routine, nourishing food, clean living environment. So getting in and cleaning the house, especially the bedroom area, making sure that's an environment that's as a recuperating area, your quiet sanctuary place, having a spot in the house where you might just do reading and contemplation and listening to music, or a spot in the garden to do that. And this is where we also help our participants to challenge themselves to think differently, along with their short-term goals of reframing the way they see events, encouraging somebody to learn from mistakes made and flip that, reframe it, and build a positive self-image for that person to set goals for the future, and making goals that are different to the AOD and alcohol use. What are some of the goals that they might wanted to have achieved if they didn't have a habit to change? They might have wanted to aim to travel. They might have wanted to, I really want to get that garden started, get a veggie patch going. I really wanted to join a sporting group. I really wanted to go out and meet more people in a socializing way. These are all great goals. That's not related to drug and alcohol use. This is another goal, set of goals besides focusing on that area. This is about thinking differently, thinking outside the box of relapse and contemplation and going through that model of change. This is about wanting something more for themselves. That could be really encouraged, doing art, walking in the park, taking time to walk the pet daily maybe, or doing simple activities besides these goals. And those goals can then end up being bigger and bigger. Too. So this is the resource that we're talking about here. I'm just going to pause here. So I'm now going to take you to the worksheet that looks at triggers. So let me just change my screen here. And I'm just going to bring up that worksheet. There it is. So let's have a look at the sheet here. Let me just bring up my panel. There we go. So I wanted this to share as a tool for that you could find out around triggers. So triggers are not, we can use this in different areas too. So for people who have different life events, to give acknowledgement to that as well. But this sheet talks about the problem and what contributes to those triggers. So if you're exposed to a trigger, what could be the worst case scenario? So here is anything that can be a trigger, and exploring what triggers are: a person, a place, a thing. And there's some coping mechanisms there around therapistaid.com around what to do with dealing with triggers. And they often talk about dealing with a trigger head on, but often it needs somebody else to be there to help you do that as well. Now, we also then have a section where how do you deal with those triggers, and how do you avoid or reduce those triggers? And when something can't be avoided, what can you do? So thinking, these are good questions for somebody to work through their client with. So let me just stop share there. So for those at home, as well as in class, we're going to do an activity. I would like everybody to have a look at that sheet and see if you can answer some of those things to do just for personal reflection on what those triggers could be for somebody. So let me just pause here. So going back to that sheet around possible triggers, what did you find that you could relate to for participants around what would be a trigger for an emotional state? Anyone?
We did it more personally, Sarah and I. We were actually just talking more about ourselves in the last couple of weeks.
Okay, so can you, just for the sake of privacy, take it
Yeah.
away from the personal?
Mhm.
What would have related to an emotional state? So would it have been an upset? Would it have been a
Stress,
relationship arguing, or
stress, kids, pressure of work and stuff like that.
Yep.
And then
Okay.
even
Yep.
some stuff, even like coming down to like, sort of how you sort of cope with that, or it's going to happen. But once you're actually there, how you sort of take it on board and try to work through it. Sometimes you've left it too long.
Yeah.
And you're already there.
Yeah.
Or you think you've got a handle of it and you don't.
Yeah. 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 It ends up being more than you thought it was going to be. But that also depends on your emotional state too at the time, doesn't it? And what else you're trying to juggle.
And sometimes it's just something that's completely different to the situation you're in that sends you off.
Yep, definitely. So what would be a trigger for someone around places?
Being at parties and pubs and things where they used to drink, or things for enjoyment, it would be really hard to just go and not drink, and people will probably say, oh, come on, just have one. They don't understand what they've got an addiction and what that means. They think, oh, you can just have one and you'll be fine.
Or you don't want them to know that you have an addiction.
Yeah.
Yes,
That's
yes, that's another
pressure.
very good point. Yeah. Which makes it rather difficult because you're going to have to change a lot of your platforms where you go and socialize if nobody knows what you're trying to change. And at least, but that's, down to choices too. It's what somebody can cope with as well. So what?
Might you become very isolated because, say, you've got a group of friends that do have that habit and that you always do those old habits with, and that's how you used to connect with them, and you don't want to do that anymore. And so then you kind of lose that group of friends in a way. So you have to change. You might then feel really lonely, which might be a trigger, and it's a bit of a
It is a complex paradox sometimes.
Yeah.
But often, and I do know somebody who's in therapy at the moment that talks about having to change a lot of the social circles they're in because it's all geared to drinking.
Yeah.
In some sort of food and drinking, barbecue drinking, at the footy drinking. So even though he said, I felt confident, I'll say to them, I don't need to do this, like I'm not doing that part of it, he would feel, excuse me, left out at the moment until he feels stronger. So his understanding right now is that he has new people from the support group he's in.
Yeah.
They're his new people. Not so much that he'll be socializing with them. He'll find different ways to socialize with family that he can say straight point, no alcohol. When we come to dinner, please have no alcohol. And the family will do that. Whereas all his other social activities, even to do with work functions, there's more than during the day, not so much, but they would often then go out for a drink after a big meeting.
Yeah.
So having to say, he's already thought of those interim strategies that, look, I've got work to do, I'll see you later, and not going to that. But he said for all those other social things, he's now seeing from group therapy that there has to be a little bit different focus on how I socialized before until I get to the strength where I'm okay being with these people and they're doing something, but how does that not trigger me? But he said that I mightn't get to that space at all, but how am I going to do this? So he's even talking with his therapist about going out with these people one-on-one. That could be another option where he talks to them one-on-one about what his aim and goals are and just socialize them with a one-on-one situation where that person might be able to sustain the use whilst they're watching the football game together. Yeah, but in
It
a
still
different
sounds
environment.
dangerous though, doesn't it? As you explain it, it still sounds a little bit sort of risky.
It's quite risky because people have to weigh up where the triggers are going to come from.
Yeah.
And you're not going to know them all, but you do know those social places or activities or situations you might get yourself into that will have something there that cause a trigger.
And if you think of the football or whatever, anywhere that's playing it is a bar or it's got something with alcohol. There's nowhere that just plays it that's not.
But it's also about, for this person, it's about their company.
Yeah.
So they would get a private box, and so that gets alcohol on tap. So his idea is to not visit in that frame go down into the front seats where I don't think you're allowed alcohol. So at least he could be at a live game. But also visiting different games that are not so big. So the local sports clubs, go down and watch that and not enter into buying a drink or food or anything, just go to watch the game. The
So I
pure
guess,
love of the game.
yeah, or the junior ones where there is no alcohol served at all.
So it's about changing those triggers, but it takes a while. But, you know, like even stopping the triggers around thoughts about it, that's quite difficult. And this is where those phone numbers come in handy, and those support groups, and you might have a mentor or a coach in any of these support groups as well. So it's quite a handy tool to understand that even though they talk about a best way to deal with something is to avoid it, some things can't be avoided. So then you as the worker helping ensure that participants have a bank of strategies. This is where not just one or two, a bank of them. Because if the emotions are strong or the thoughts patterns are strong, we need more than one or two different strategies here. So let me just go back to share my screen. Right, so with strategies on how to do motivational interviewing, support, techniques that they use in groups, we've got a little activity here where we're going to pair up and one person will act as the worker and the other person will act as the participant. And we're going to have a look at this activity and think about some of the things that you would use to help John in this situation. So John has depression and anxiety and takes fluoxetine as an antidepressant medication. So John currently smokes 25 to 30 cigarettes a day. John isn't able to afford his medication and his smoking addiction, and he's decided to reduce his use of cigarettes. He recently lost his job to not taking his medication, so some sort of behavioural reaction here, which might have put things at risk, and purchased cigarettes instead. So he went back to his first coping mechanism. So John thinks that his smoking helps his mental health, as he reports being less anxious after having a cigarette, but he'd rather reduce his usage than quit. Pick one motivational interview technique from the previous slides around and rehearse how you would use this technique with John for his situation. So how would you help John in that going into, say, a lapse stage because he decided to get reports being less anxious after he's had a cigarette because so he purchased a cigarette because he lost his job. So this could be a lapse here, but the thing is that he doesn't want to give up. He just wants to reduce his usage rather than quit. So he's not fully committed to stopping cigarettes because the belief would be quite strong there that it's soothing and where he reports there's less anxious feelings after a cigarette. So how could you motivate them to help John change his situation? I'm just going to press pause here. All right, so after looking at that case with John and somebody being the case manager and somebody being the participant.
Angie's laughing.
I know that. I'm trying not to smile at her. What did you find from, you're disruptive, Bron.
100%.
Good to have you back.
Thanks.
I'm regressing here. Hang on. Look, see, you've done a very good job, Bron. Okay. All right. So back to John and the case manager. What did you find was difficult to help to do in that situation? Were there any problems that were difficult, or was it a solution focused type of activity? Give me your thoughts.
We did it more as a discussion, didn't we?
Yeah.
There was
Yeah,
Why don't you
sounds
job
good.
us straight in with that one?
But we did identify, like, yes, he's got the habit of smoking, but it's also the action of smoking. So, like, what do you do with your hands? What can we try and brainstorm some ideas that what he can do when he gets a crowd? He's trying to reduce, and so he wants to not take that one cigarette. So what can he do in place of doing that? So he might not have the physical craving for it, but it's the action that he's
Mental trigger of,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's a very, very good point, actually,
Yeah.
because it is that physical thing. I remember when my father gave up, he resorted to having to put something in his mouth. So he went to chewing on the end of the matchsticks. And I mean, this is back in the 70s. So there was always matches, not so much cigarette lighter, but, the wooden end just to hold it and chew, right? Then he actually he had a lot of distaste in his mouth. So he liked peppermint. So he went to Lifesavers, those little round lollies. And right throughout his Lifesavers, you'd always find half a packet in his shirt somewhere. And even though he mightn't have used them all the time, it was still something that he resorted to. But in the beginning, we used to have to go up the shop and get him a new packet every day.
They do say a lot of people put a lot of weight on too, don't they, when they stop smoking?
Because they find another habit.
Yeah.
They find there's a trigger.
Yeah.
And that action. So then often people, and I remember in the 70s, they brought pens out that looked like cigarettes. And it was about chewing or putting the end in or whatever. And you would have to clean them, but it was around this holding it. And even talking in discussions they found, because people would have cigarettes and talk and hold their cigarette. And,
we did mention big bosses.
Yep.
Have a big boss instead.
So it's interesting that you bring that up, because it is a very physical part of that.
And then we thought when it got to the other end where you're trying to get him to cut down for that last one or two, that maybe that, you would do an activity that was more like a day thing, and maybe the support worker or whoever holds on to the cigarettes and tries to distract him. So if it's fishing or something, so he's just not thinking of it.
Yeah.
As such.
So it's a layering up of.
Yeah. And if you got through half a day or you got through one day, well, then tomorrow we could try it again.
Yeah. Excellent.
We did do some work.
You did actually. You did more than you thought you did.
100%.
Bonnie and Ange, what did you discover?
So I was a caseworker, and the reason for my laughing, because I've never done a plan that fast in 5 minutes. And yes, I'll be actually getting any work done. So yes, we did as a caseworker. I've got a huge responsibility here, so I better get to the work, yeah? So bear with me. So forgive me a second, I took some notes and I don't think I can I've written that fast. So we've cut down from 30 to 20. So I'll say my part, and then Bonnie can say her part as the patient or the person, the other person. Yeah, so cut down from 30 to 20, then discuss why you need to cut down and the reason. So it needs to be a reason behind it, and then she'll explain what the reason is. So then, like, explain to John about his medication and show him a plan, financially, a brief financially about the plan for the medication, the plan for the cigarettes and stuff like that. So that would be in the plan. And the benefits of the plan, how you can benefit from it. And another thing is doing the journal. I can't read the notes, sorry, it's too much. So a journal to write down and keep a record, because again, some people are visual learners. Because you might go in one ear, come out the other ear. Now, when you get if you're feeling anxious when cutting down and the steps are coming forward, maybe do some activities like walking, listening to music, go to the beach, you know, etc. Those are the things we can implement while cutting down. I think I had give me 1 second, sorry. I had a whole 5 minutes to do this.
You're doing really well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, and just being really encouraging and very like follow up as well, like do a follow up in regards to the cutting down and how this person is coping, how John's coping with the reducing of it all. Yeah, the follow up I think is important, and if that strategies doesn't work, sorry, I struggle with that word, then you find something else, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
So as a caseworker, that's the best I can come up with in 5 minutes. Caseworker slash student.
Love that you looked at replacing one behavior with another.
Yes.
An action, a physical doing, so especially around that diary, but you're giving them new focus. A really good point you made about getting out and try and distract yourself into a whole different place of go for a walk, go do something, you know, physical, because that serotonin buildup and endorphins can build up and replace that need, that trigger. So very good point, especially with mental health and reducing usage. That physical act component is one of the most talked about components in recovery today. So well done on identifying that. Bonnie, from your perspective?
I thought, because I actually am a smoker, got to deal with that next. Cutting from 30 to 20 will be quite easy in the beginning. I don't know about down the track. Breathing, just breathing fresh air, holding the cigarette without lighting it, was something that we came up with as well. And I just thought everything was quite doable, including sucking lollipops. We talked about that. But the overall was the benefits were having more money, breathing easier, the listening to music would be good, and the journaling about what the build-up was for each cigarette, and the follow-up would be very good. The only downside is the anxiety, because I've come across this before with mental health practitioners like doctors and psychiatrists. My son, many years ago, he's well now, was in the psych ward. He'd never smoked in his life. He was 22 and took up smoking while in the psych ward. And when I was panicking, saying to the doctor, can we stop this? He said, no, it's quite normal for somebody to take up smoking when they're in the state that he was, which I found a bit, but apparently that's what doctors agreed to at that stage. That was about 20 years ago, 15 years ago.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, well, he said it would reduce the anxiety, so yeah.
Just to try it first.
But I was
And-
quite alarmed, being a smoker myself, that he'd gone that
A little bit more.
long without taking up cigarettes, and his
Yeah.
brother never did. That a doctor would say, just leave him be.
That's a real conflict, isn't it? Like, and
Yeah.
but the overall aim of changing somebody's mental health by doing that, is that something that they work on later down the track about reducing, or, you know, I don't know what the method was back then, but to know that if somebody was using that sort of mechanism now, the reduction process would happen when they're in a better, you know, space to cope with that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it takes a few weeks to get. So this was in the first few weeks of him taking up smoking. It takes a little bit longer for that addiction to kick in. So yeah, at the time I wasn't happy, but you know, he's well and healthy now and he's still smoking.
But I like the plan of, you know, go from 30 to 20, break it down, see how you're coping there. I like the positiveness around you encouraging that you're going to save money here, which can be a very big focus, and actually just holding one, not using it. Now, there's a bit of a seesaw there. Is it too tempting, or is it just the thought of holding it is enough to reconnect, to feel that urge?
Yeah. I think it would be okay for me. It would depend on the individual.
Now, I will add in here, how would that work with the nicotine patch and being able to hold a cigarette?
I shouldn't say this, it's really naughty, but when I have had to be in hospital, they put a nicotine patch on me and I still smoked with it on, and that's really naughty. No one should do that. So yeah, it didn't really help in that situation because I was quite stressed and anxious.
Yeah.
But I think if once a person is calm and stable and whatever, it would be okay. Like
When
even with
the mind's
nicotine
wanting to
patch
do
on.
that. Yeah, okay, yep. So your situation was different around the mental health was more the priority here. Whereas if somebody's in that commitment stage of wanting to reduce and is working towards it, then would a patch help assist that, you know, because they're on that path.
Yeah, I don't think patches help at all, to be honest.
There you go.
That's my personal opinion.
If I could say,
nicotine in the body, aren't you? You're holding on to the addiction. You're probably breaking the habit, but you still got the addiction.
Well, if I could say from my experience with my husband, he went cold turkey 12 years ago. My neighbor passed away from cancer from smoking, and he said, look, I've got a few patches left. And he gave him the patch. So he whacked the patch on. And when he saw how my neighbor was, he got a little bit scared. And the patches actually give him nightmares. I thought I was his nightmare, not just the patches. But anyway, he got some nightmares, and then he just ripped them off, and that was it. He went cold turkey. And after 12 years, Saturday night, he came in with an e-cigarette in his hand. I was doing some hairdressing, and he came in with a e-cigarette in his hand, and I thought it was a real cigarette. And after 12 years, that's the first time he's pulled a trick on me, and I was like, no way. I got so upset, and he's like, no, I was just pulling your leg. But it takes a lot mentally to go cold turkey as well. Not everyone can manage it that way as well. Everyone's different, I guess. But the patch did help him to a degree as well. So yeah, just that I share.
Individual, isn't it? Certainly, yeah. And their will. Somebody's will.
Well, I think quite often with cigarettes, personally for me, if I can hold off as long as possible until I can't hold off anymore, that's a good way of quitting. Because quite often it's just a habit to pick up a cigarette for something to do. It's not
Yeah.
the actual addiction. Mm.
Yeah. I like
Mm.
that you said that's to something to do.
Mm.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not a person that will walk around and smoke a cigarette. I have to be sitting in with a cup of coffee or a cool drink.
Mm,
So going for a walk is good. Mm.
mm. Thank you. Sarah?
I was just wanting to ask more about the nicotine things, because there's more than the nicotine patches, isn't there? There's like the chewing gum and things like that. So could that
Yeah.
be part of reducing, say, like they want to reduce from 20 to 30. So I don't know whether this works because I've never smoked. So instead of smoking a cigarette, would you be able to chew a piece of chewing gum? Like,
In
would that
between.
help? Yeah, in place of that cigarette, have a piece of chewing, like that nicotine chewing.
Look,
Like, I don't know. I've got
well,
no
it's all
idea.
about strategies to suggest to the participant, isn't it?
Mm.
Options, because this is about knowledge. So
Yeah.
I would be getting onto the quit line for a start and asking what suggestions they would have for your participant for
Yeah.
a start, as well as giving them the quit line number, because that's another strategy to have in place. Also talking to your GP, because I know there is some sort of, there's one medication that can help with that.
I think
But
it's
they do
called
often talk.
Champex or something.
I've
Yeah,
tried that. And actually,
Sounds like dog food.
Yeah.
it was like being on speed or something. Not that I've ever taken speed, but nightmares and no sleep.
Really?
Mm.
And that's interesting because a lot of people react to that. Angie, is that the one? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one he had, and I think he'll jump out of his sleep and start walking in the house and carrying on. And he did that for about a good 2 weeks, and anyway, ripped it all off. Like I could see, he literally ripped it off. I went, "No, I can't do this anymore," and he just quit.
Angie, you didn't jump in front of him while he's doing it.
You know, it's funny. The person get the credit, but it's the person behind the scene that deals
Yep.
with it
Yeah.
that needs the actual counseling, I think.
Yep.
I have a question, if that's all right. So we have dry July.
Mm.
Yes, I'm not sure about, because I mean I don't smoke and he don't smoke, so I'm not into smokes anymore or anything like that. Do we have anything like that going overall in Australia in regards to supporting
No.
the same kind of
I
situation?
believe there is, and I think it is National Quit Day. I'm just checking it.
Ah,
Quitters Day. Second Friday in January, known as Quitters Day. Oh, actually, it's not an actual formal day. It's known as, through research, that most people decide to give something up mid-January after the New Year's resolution. National Quit Smoking Day.
Stop it.
Here we go.
so it's only one day.
Yeah.
Yeah, is it? I thought dry July was about drinking.
Yes.
Yeah, that's about drinking, but I'm looking for no smoking day. There's the government has an initiative getting ready. Actually, this is quite interesting. It's called initiatives.queensland.gov.au, and it's called Quit Headquarters, and it's about getting ready to quit and activities that somebody could be using. Now let's have a look at No Smoking Day, Wednesday, the 12th of March, 2025. You've got a long wait to. Now there's other things that the government put out about World No Tobacco Day. So that's make every day World No Tobacco Day. That's on the 31st of May. Yeah, that's a national campaign across the world. The world theme in 2024, No Tobacco Day, was around protecting children from tobacco industry. So now you've got the vape industry happening. So that was a big part of on the 31st of May that happened. And there's a slogan that they use: say no to tobacco to increase your life and glow. Quit tobacco today to live young tomorrow. Smoking tobacco could kill both active and passive smokers. So this is around smoking and health awareness. So there are many things out there actually that are probably not as noticeable.
I don't know. Those slogans were pretty catchy. They're stuck in my head. Anyone else? No?
Nothing sticks in my head at the minute. There's few.
All right, thanks for that. Now let's get back to, get pushing a screen. Here we go. So it's interesting that we, in each way, found something different to utilize. And this is where pooling resources are very good. So let's have a look. We're up to. So we're looking at making sure that when you're working with somebody that you're documenting those plans. So having those decisions on paper as well. Like Angie said, that the visual learner, in doing these documenting plans, doing it in collaboration with the participant, working out what services you could be doing the research on different services like we just did then with your participant if you're case managing them. And then this is about autonomy of choice and build up the interest and awareness. Oh, I never knew that was happening. Tell me more about that one. So it's actually quite a good tool strategy to do research on things. I've got so much information here, but let's have a look and see what other new relevant information is there. Remember, autonomy of choice. And making sure that we're recording and following up on what we're doing, what strategies will be implemented, what services and resources are required. So don't forget, in that case for John, the quit line for a start, he's going to have a plan. So you might have a month of goals to reach for week by week to reduce by how many. So if he could reduce 5 cigarettes each week over that time frame, that's part of the plan. Bron?
His medication, wasn't it, to keep the cigarettes going? Was that right?
Sorry, say that again.
He'd given up his medication because he couldn't afford both at that time. Did I read that right? Yeah.
Let me see. He has been able to afford his medication and his smoking addiction, and he's decided to get help to reduce his usage of cigarettes. So he hasn't given up his medication.
Oh, okay. All right. So I read that wrong. Sorry.
Yeah, the point of change was financially,
Yeah.
it's too much to do the fluoxetine and cigarettes at the same time. So that shows you that that person's using them therapeutically.
Okay.
Self-soothing. So
Can I
for
ask
us,
a question?
yeah.
Sorry. Is it say if you're a smoker and you're working in the industry trying to help someone quit? I know it could be a good thing in one way because you can identify, but if there is, say, a technique that you didn't think worked, is it hard to then, as a worker, believe that it is a good tool and tell them about it? I don't know whether I'm explaining this well. Say journaling, you hate journaling. So you think it's not very good, but it might be good for your client. Is it hard for the worker personally to then encourage it?
Yeah. Yes, because you're not a part of this solution. That's not your thoughts on this. This is about offering as much knowledge as you can for autonomy of choice, remember? So whether you think something work really not, unless you've got evidence that it's damaging, well then, of course, then not. But if it's something that you think only 1 in 10 people might use, that could be your 1 in 10 person sitting there in front of you.
Yep.
All about options. And then you'll soon know something will come back and somebody will go, yeah, I tried that and that was useless. Or I actually quite like that, but I probably didn't do it right. So then there's an opportunity to tweak it, you know. But yeah, there will be things that you suggest that you think, oh, haven't heard this work really well. But this is why you do evidence-based industry knowledge. So research. So this is where sticking with your getting your newsletters and up to date what's happening in the industry. So is there a new technique? You know, this is evidence-based. Would you like to know about it? You don't have to know a lot or know that it's other than it's evidence-based, peer-reviewed, researched by scientists and what the outcomes were. And if it was something that they're saying that's new to the sector and it looks like it's the next tool, well, then you can give somebody the information on it. Just with our policies and procedures here, making sure that always, you know, confidentiality of files, doing that referral procedure and process, gaining consent, adhering to client privacy. We're doing all this as well as working with the participants. So it is a juggle. It is certainly a juggle of things that we're trying to achieve in this process for it all. So there's how to want to reduce your use. So for those at home, that is slide 18. So I'm just going to press pause here. So for everybody watching the recording, do watch that this video clip called Want to Reduce Your Use, because there's some really good resources in there. Can anybody bring up some of the resources that you saw through that recording? Because living positive, and there was quite a other reduction programs in there that they advertised that the workers were talking about that they work in. So go back and do have a look at that, because there's some really good resources in there that you could use for your assignments. Put it in your list of resources for future work. But it was interesting. It'd be good to go and have a look at what Living Positive does. You saw that there was a national touchbase.org.au around usage. So some really good resources there. And I did like that one of the workers' statements was, you have to put yourself first. It's another reminder of why this person's doing this. And we often, when we're trying to work collaboratively with someone and identifying limits, we've got to look at how we minimize the risk of harm. What are the support networks? So it was interesting in that video clip as well, they talked about that 24/7 hotline that you can just call up and ask for practical support, strategies, talk to somebody and gain some support through that hotline, which was another good resource there. Looking at evidence-based de-escalation techniques. And if a conflict is something that might trigger somebody to go back and use, how do you de-escalate that so you don't get to that point of conflicts and making things get worse? And also to identifying limits, we have to think about, even in the worker space, knowing that work can cause stress. So people who are trying to give up habits also find working on what causes stress and identifying those limits and boundaries is important as well. There's another video in here for you to look at, and it's around substance abuse counselling demonstration. It's 23 minutes, but we'll let you have a look at that in your own time. So if we're doing referrals, we're looking at all the options that we can, that could be pre-existing already. And so for people who are challenged with AOD addictions, often there is the need for extra external support around psychosocial support, as they call it. So it could be housing, could be a legal representation that they need, financial services, employment, community supports and networks. And there's a responsibility on our part to making sure we're documenting that. So we're making sure that the referral process is there, or documenting what other services they're accessing, because we want to make sure that the participants not overloading up too much or reusing, doubling up on services. That cannot be beneficial. And making sure us as workers following those policies and procedures. So we're going to quickly touch on, before we finish tonight, on task 1 and 2. The client support, task 1 is a set of questions. Task 2 is the client report. So there's 3 clients that you're working with here, Lee, Sujin, and Justin. And this is about looking for models of service to support them. So in task 2, there is a scenario, and then there's questions under each one. The scenario is very short and brief. It's not a very detailed one, but there's a set of, I think, 6 to 8 questions under each task that you're to answer in relation to the 3 different types of scenarios here. We're going to unpack task 3 and 4 next week because they're more complex around the role plays. But in task 2, make sure that you, when you look at the scenario, pick up the things that are problematic for the participant in that scenario, and think about models of change or what services they need in the AOD field. What referrals would you make for somebody? What resources, different to referrals, what resources would you give someone? We've actually seen quite a few tonight that you'd be able to access out of this PowerPoint tonight and the recordings. And I just wanted to remind everybody here that to make a Calendly appointment now, it's not, it's now managed by the learning support team, and there's more staff on board. So that is accessing this Calendly link here. And you can book in there to do role plays or do task work with a trainer. It's not for the trainers now to organise that. And for any other questions, you can also email the learning support team at lso@haiderinstitute.edu.au. It's not a capital I and it's not a capital L. So it's LSO, which is Learning Support Officer at Haida Institute, but you might be trying an older Calendly link. This is the newest updated one. Bron?
Has Hader been taken over or something?
No. They're just upgrading their services, trying to make sure that learners are supported quicker. So they've got some new processes that they're trialing.
Okay. It
More-
doesn't
more
seem
for-
as friendly as it used to be. It seems more like very routine structure type of thing.
There's
that's-
a lot of
Yep.
lot of evaluations coming in from behind the scenes around watching recordings and gaps in spaces around, like we talked about, chatting, not being able to follow what's going on there. And they're also just trying to update to make sure that people are not getting missed out on their support. So a change in processes. So if there's any old links you're using other than the LSO for Calendly, don't use them. You might be booking in and there mightn't be anybody on this other end. So this is the new way to go, because it goes straight to a learning support officer who puts that request in either for a role play, a trainer support, or group activity and things like that. So there's our links, and of course our self-help resources here, Beyond Blue, Lifelines, Suicide Callback, 1-800-RESPECT, Parent Line, Men's Line, 13-YARN, Kids Helpline. All these are resources that we can put in our resource kit, as well as for everybody to be aware that, you know, as we approach Are You OK Day, you might know somebody that might need some support, and there's some resources there for you. So let me just press stop. So we'll go into task 3 and 4 next week. There's a bit to unpack for the role plays there, because you're doing an AOD assessment and plan. So we'll go through those steps as well next week. And I wish everybody a safe week.
Thank you.